Let me introduce our panel as we get going. We've got Justin up here, the esteemed Dr. Justin Jackson. We've got Kelly. Yeah, I know, it's always good to give Justin a round of applause. Kelly, who did a bang-up job for us tonight speaking, and then Lindsay Schott, who's amazing, one of the best people around Stonegate, who knows a ton just about theology and life, and we thought she'd be such a great voice to chime in for us tonight as we just have some discussion about what Kelly was sharing with us. So let me kick us off with this. Kelly, what would you say? I mean, a lot of folks are hearing what you're saying, and we identify with it, we resonate. But then there's just that question of, but what about my hopes and dreams? What happens when my hopes and dreams feel like they conflict with just finding my purpose in a person? Or is that going to be enough for me along the way, especially if my hopes and dreams maybe don't go the way that I was anticipating or planning in life?
You're good company. I think that what I'm talking with putting your purpose in a person, not in hopes and dreams, may sound good in a church situation like this, but when we walk out of here, we're talking about really painful moments. Like when I have felt prohibited from doing things that I dreamed of doing, I mean, that has really felt like a death. And sometimes I think locating our purpose in the right place will feel like death at first. So if you feel a little bit of that, I mean, Jesus says that you can't follow me without taking up your cross. So we are promised that while we will be fully fulfilled in him, it's also we're going to have an experience of it costing us something. And when the thing that we've dreamed of stands at odds with me living rightly, that can be hard. And one simple example would be the season of life that I'm in. I could have done a lot of things around even this book launch that maybe peers of mine do out there that I like doing, that I would have liked to do, but I have 5 kids, as you guys know, probably see me in the lobby. And to be faithful to Jesus where he's planted me means I have to prefer my relationship with God, the people in front of me, and that costs me other things I could be doing that seem really glamorous and cool, and sometimes that's hard. Like, gosh, I would have liked to have done that, and my life circumstance prohibits me from doing that if I'm going to be faithful to, I exist for God, and I'm at his disposal, and that does hurt. But I would say I find that on the other side of being submitted to that, God has not failed to be enough for me, though he doesn't feel like that in every single day of my life. I don't think the feeling is always there, but God has always been faithful to show up.
Yeah, I think you're actually giving really great texture to what it means to die daily. Like there is a picking up your cross that goes way beyond just a moment in time where we make a decision to follow the Lord, but it's a daily battle to once again practice faith once again and trust the Lord with the life he's given you and the life in front of you and the day that he's made for you. Not even thinking 2, 3, 4 years down the line, but just 2 hours down the line. And can I embrace this as a gift from the Lord?
Easier said than done.
Let me push on this a little bit. I'd be curious to hear everyone else's thoughts. What are some competitors for finding our purpose in Jesus that make this hard? I mean, we're disciples of Jesus in this specific context, in this Western American context. So what are some of the cultural competitors that you think just make this hard for us to live out?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a lot put out there on social media for us to look at that feels very spiritual and very Christian even. Big, glorious things done for Jesus that seem really impactful in the world. So I'm just going to name that ministry maybe, like very public ministry. I think that can be something that we look at and seems very important and seems like it will change the world. And we have this great, glorious news of the gospel. We want it out there. But I think that can compete with, is my purpose the person of God? Am I at his disposal when he wants to maybe put me somewhere else? I think that ministry component is a big one right now. Whether that's on your own or in a church context, it can feel really great to have the name badge, the doctor title, and that's not a bad thing. But I think that can compete with our loyalty to Jesus at times. I think achievements in the workplace are that too, but that'd be my answer.
Yeah, I think I would add to that. We live in a day and age that highlights and idolizes expressive individualism, right? So whatever you want must be good because you want it, right? And it's you. You do you, and you do your thing. And I just think that there's sometimes that we need that reminder. While culture's telling us that you just need to figure out what you want to do, you need to figure out who you are, you need to find your meaning, your story, live your life, live your path. I think there's some good wisdom in just hearing consistently, not everything you want is good for you. You are a fallen person, which means that some of your desires are deviant. Which means that if you chase after your desires, you're going down a road that God doesn't want for you. So I just think I think the biggest challenge is we don't hear enough voices speaking out in the culture of you just do you do what you want. I think we live in a culture where, especially 20-somethings and up, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, we just don't surround ourselves with enough community to tell us like, hey, I know you really want to do that thing, but what you want is stupid and wrong. It'll kill you, right? And I think that kind of individualism is what's really killing our purpose in a lot of ways. So I think it's a huge competitor.
Justin does all our pastoral care here at Stonegate too, so just so everyone knows. It's awesome.
That's Jeff.
So good at
I'm
it.
not the pastor who cares.
We've got like 100% rating on Yelp, so just check it out. It's awesome.
Right? I mean, there's this existential messaging, even like in kids' movie, right? Kung Fu Panda is like, I don't feel like I'm the dragon warrior. And what is the scroll? The scroll is a mirror. And it's like, Poe, the answer's you. Oh, like, yay. Or it's like Frozen 2. Like, Elsa is searching for something. She thinks it's in a glacier. And like, the biggest letdown of the whole movie is like, you are the one you've been waiting for all of your life. And you're like, what? What a letdown. Like, she's like, this can't be it, right? But culturally, it was like, wow, Elsa's mental health is on point. And it's like, no. But like from messaging, like children's messaging, like, you're the answer, look for you. Even when I was 18, the biggest question about, like, when I'm thinking college and career, it's like, Lindsay, what are you passionate about? And that is a dumb thing to ask me. Because at 18, I'm like, I don't know. I like my friends. I like that I got to drive a car for a while. Like, I still like eating pizza. Like, what do I know? But, like, there's this constant messaging of, like what Kelly said, the answer is ultimately in you, which is an enormous pressure. Like, I can't possibly be the solution to this problem. Like, the ache in me is too big for me to be the solution. But the messaging of the answer is in you is everywhere, and it's outright, but it's also subtle, and it's in everything.
Yeah, and to continue to build off this, I mean, you'd have to just think that this is creating a lot of the anxiety that maybe we feel wide right now, across the board, just this level of anxiety. So I'm just curious, like, thoughts on that of like, is there a link between just this, we are trying to put too much purpose and significance and find it all internally in ourselves and make it all about us, that it is leading to a culture that feels overly anxious at times? And how are those things linked?
I think they are connected, and I'm actually seeing secular writers identify that are saying, like Elizabeth Gilbert was one, she wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and she has a TED Talk you can watch, it's fascinating, where she says, I wrote this book and it sold 12 million copies, and she was on Oprah and it was everything, and so everybody treated me like I was doomed after that. It's like, well, you made it to the top, now what? I mean, it's like, if I have to be the source of my meaning, even if I achieve it all, they're still like, well, what do I do the rest of my life? I did it, I peaked, it's done. And she says, I think we need something otherworldly to ground us. We need to go back to the gods, okay? There's a whole other book I read that's all about we need a resurgence of something sacred and bigger than us. We are not big enough to hold the weight of meaning for our lives. So you're seeing secular authors get it, but their answer is, I don't know, pick a god and go worship him. I mean, so I do think they're connected. They're saying people are dying. Their suicide rates are high because the pressure's all on you to make your life meaningful. So you better get to work figuring it out and doing it. And both of those are exhausting. And we run out of energy and we run out of juice. And so we just we give up and, settle for something. And then eventually that ache in us that's meant for God still lives in there and it drives us crazy. Anyway, so I think it is connected, that sacred longing for something bigger and the anxiety that we feel if we don't ground it outside of ourselves.
Yeah, and one of the things I was thinking about too, and Kelly, so much of this was even spawned by reading through your book of just that very reality of just our anxiety, how much it is linked into this idea of if I am going to chase after all the things the world tells me to chase after, consumption, like I'll just consume my way into happiness, I'll consume my way into a purpose. And really, if there's something wrong in me or I'm not feeling fulfilled, it must be because there's something else I need to consume. Another product, another relationship, another experience, whatever that is along the way. And I think one of the things I do love about the Bible so much is it's gritty and it's real. And so we can actually go back to the Bible and see that we're not the first generation around this cul-de-sac to try these things, to satiate these appetites and these desires for purpose. And I'm just curious for you guys, are there any good biblical examples or principles or highlights you can even think of that speak to this very thing that sometimes we're like, no, I know they've tried it before in generations past, but we're going to do it again. And we're going to run around this cul-de-sac and we're going to get a completely different result. And so just curious what you guys think about that.
Yeah, man can't make towers big enough to get himself up to God. I mean, we see that in Babel where we're constantly trying to build our towers up to the tops where it reaches the heavens so we can walk among the gods and we can make a great name for ourselves. And the thing is God's not against the great name, right? Because you see that in Genesis 11 where the people of Babel want to make a great name for themselves. But with Abraham, what does he do? He promises him a great name. It's not the great name that's so bad. It's the reason behind the great name. It's the reason for what you want to do. I find a lot of people want a platform, but what they want to do with the platform is really revealing. What they want to do with the more social media, with the more followers, with the wider TikTok audience, with being able to do here, they're not satisfied with the obscure positions or anything like that. They want to be up front. They want to be in the spotlight. And I'm like, guys, that show that time and time again. That's just a Babel that's destined to fall. It's going to fall. And so just being able to pastor yourself to see God's great names typically come when you're old and barren and going to walk around the desert without any visible sign of his promises coming for about 40 years. Everybody wants to be Moses, but no one wants to shepherd sheep for 40 years nameless. Everybody wants to be David, but nobody wants to go into exile. And it's like, my friends, the story of the Bible, and Ryan's favorite book, I think, to quote from, and he's got so much wisdom in using it so often, is that J-shaped curve, that the steady pattern of God's people is actually downward into namelessness, downward into suffering, downward into obscurity. Joseph goes down for 2 years into prison. That's not exaltation, my friends. That's like and that has to happen before there's an exaltation. But we live in a generation that we only want promotion. We only want exaltation. I think we have to fight against that to be like, if you want that exaltation, you have to die first, and that death is gonna not feel great. So
read with that lens in view, and you'll see it in the disciples, you'll see it in the Pharisees, you'll see it in the Old Testament and the New Testament. People eager, they're comparing themselves to others. I mean, they're doing all the things we're doing. So we didn't need technology for that. It's a new iteration of the same old problem.
And that's where, the women at Stonegate spent quite a bit of time last year in it, but I think that's where the book of Ecclesiastes is so helpful, because it does give you such an insight into humans that ran the experiment on our behalf over and over. And so there is lessons that we can learn rather than having to kind of do the same thing over and over and chase after these things that we think will bring us purpose, and then we end up disillusioned and frustrated decades later.
For Lindsay, actually. Lindsay disciples quite a few ladies in the church. Lindsay, Kelly says if God wants us to be for him, right? He's not as concerned with our doing. You know, we hear the phrase all the time from Rodney, from Kelly, from Jimmy, that God wants human beings, not human doings, right? What do we do with all the commands to do in the Bible, like Ephesians 2?
How do we do without doing? How do we do that without it feeling like there's a big trick and we've got to figure it out? I'm supposed to be doing, but I'm not doing. Well, it's obvious the moment you read Jesus that your motives matter to him, why you're doing what you're doing. And that's usually where we find ourselves in what we're doing. And that's usually where the Holy Spirit and the Word of God is so faithful, right? If the Word of God is used by the Spirit, it can divide two things that are as close as bone and marrow. And walking with him in our life will expose the thing that while on the outside it looks like I was doing a right thing. Gosh, was really convicted that I was doing that for a wrong reason. And the graciousness of God is that he's committed to us in the journey with the yoke to be like, yeah, I know you did that thing outwardly. I know you did it with the wrong motive, but you did the thing. And I find that regularly in my walk with God, I obey in the doing, and he does work out the motive as we go. And that's an incredible expression of his grace that even my motive of doing for God, though tarnished by sin, he is gracious and kind to me as I work that out. I think ultimately, too, I love the great quote between grace is not opposed to effort, but it is opposed to earning. And there is a doing that does because we think maybe God needs us, or there's a doing that we think gets us into his presence or better loved. Or we do an effort in the absence of doing. Don't do the bad things so that we can be more loved by him. And when that's involved in the motive, then our doing has become something that's earning and not something that is just, I love him and he's loved me. And doing in some ways out of receiving. I do this because he's loved me and because I love him. And that's sort of an effort versus an earning. And usually in our doing, those usually come out.
Justin, I think it's such a good question, too. And in a lot of my conversations with young leaders and discipling folks around Stonegate, I find myself in moments, too, where there is actually a good godly ambition, that it's rooted in a deep love and abiding satisfaction with Jesus. But one of the things I think that can short circuit or sabotage even something the Lord might be calling us to, our purpose, is even just our own impatience along the way. So sometimes, even in those conversations about purpose or what God might have in store for you, is also just a matter of timing. And we just live as Americans in a very impatient culture. We also live in a comparison culture. So often looking around us, it feels like everyone else is achieving instantaneous success. That if you haven't succeeded and started a tech startup by the time you're 30, that somehow you're a miserable failure. And the benchmarks are so high that sometimes we sabotage what the Lord might be doing in our life because we want it now. And I actually think so much of what you see in stories of the Bible is the cultivation of character in obscurity for long periods of time. And getting used to and getting comfortable with that, as even Justin was highlighting a second ago, Moses in the desert for 40 years, or those moments that often feel wasted to us, or they feel like the Lord's not in it, that this is somehow a sidetrack from where I'm supposed to be, are actually the very things the Lord's using to cultivate the character we need to live out the purpose God's calling us to.
The pattern throughout the Bible that you've already talked about is there's like a legitimate call, and then there's suffering, difficulty to test, and then he still fulfills that. And really what God is usually building underneath the greatness of a calling is like the character to match. Because like Joseph as a young guy having those dreams and being like, I had a dream that all my brothers, all y'all worship me. It's like, Joseph, you lack what it takes to be that. And his suffering, God is building that. And those stories, they've already said, are everywhere. It's Joseph, it's Moses, it's David, it's John the Baptist, it's Jesus, it's the disciples. That it's actually appropriate if you were burdened with greatness like Loki, if that's true, and if God's still going to work in your life, then probably what's next is a desert and a wilderness.
I think that's very loving of him too, because unless you have a cultivated character, it's really hard to sustain in storms that might come your way. So the biggest curse can actually be that you do shoot up and you bear a lot of fruit, but your roots are so shallow that when a windstorm comes by, you topple right over. And sadly, that's what happens too often to leaders, even in the church, that rush a process or are way too impatient. Let me ask this. So C.S. Lewis said this, one of his famous quotes is, comparison is the thief of joy. And one of the questions I'm thinking about is what do we do, or how does comparison hinder us from embracing the ordinary or the living out of God's purpose in our lives? Like, what's comparison? What's maybe its challenge in us being rooted in our purpose, Kelly?
Well, you're immediately in comparison. You've stopped looking at the one you're made for. It's Peter and John in John 21. Peter's like, just been told by Jesus what's coming. Follow me, it will mean death. And he's like, I don't like that. What about him? I mean, so comparison is there. And Jesus says, why do you care? So what if I keep him around forever? You follow me. So he kind of does the whole, hold on, you look to somebody else. I don't think we should berate ourselves for that. It's human nature, and it's really hard because of our phones and our technology to just look at people all day long, and what are they doing, and what are they doing, and how much did my thing do and their thing do, and just metrics. We want to live by numbers. And instead, when I realize it's happening to me, it's like, oh, nope, I feel like Jesus just, like with Peter, look at me. The command is just stay with me, follow me. So it will take, if you compare by nature, it's I'm looking at you and what you're doing, and that's going to drag me toward you, to copy what you're doing, to try and implement it in my own life. That's not what God's asked me to do. He's asked me to follow him, and I'll find liberty when I keep my eyes on him, which is why we're called to run the race set before us, eyes fixed on Christ, not on others, to do the good work set before us, because I have different good works that are set before me in a different day than you. And so comparison will keep me from living what God's put in front of me because I took my eyes off the goal.
It's an equip night, so we can't finish tonight without a Narnia quote. Obviously, in The Horseman's Boy, there's an amazing moment with Shasta and the lion Aslan, and Aslan kind of pulls back the veil on Shasta's life and shows where he's been his whole life. And he starts asking about his friend Aravast, right? And just says, well, what about her? And the child, and I try my deepest Aslan voice when I get to this point with my kids, my child. No one has ever told any story but their own. I am telling you your story, not theirs. I think it's such a powerful quote in that, because I think a lot of us forget that we are seeing glimpses into other people's stories. Sometimes we're seeing highlights into their stories. Sometimes we are seeing bad parts and valleys to their stories. The reality is you don't have the omniscient vision to be able to see their whole story. So it's better to be content with your story and where you're at in that story. I remember, I still do this. I'm 34 years old. I've been married for 13 years. My wife can tell you that I am the worst sinner when it comes to covetousness and comparison. I live in a 1983 style home that always has a project, and one of these days I'm going to die under one of those projects. And I go to other people's houses and I think, man, this is so nice and beautiful and great. And I'm always wondering, like, how do you guys have we were at the Needham's house. Like, how do you guys have 5 kids? And there's not sticky juice in the floor. How did I not step on a Lego the whole time I was there? And man, I just think there's sometimes that we see those glimpses and we think that that's all there is. And Kelly and Jimmy were sharing their story about marriage and everything. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's been hard valleys for you guys as well, you know? And I think just recognizing that God has you on a story. And when you remember that, that tends to help fight against the comparison. Because what we're really doing is we're trying to pace and match our story with other people's stories. And you just don't have the sight or the qualification to do that. So you just need to accept that there's a greater author writing your story, and he's going to tell you your story. He's not going to tell you everybody else's story. It's just your story that he's telling you at the moment.
So speaking of highlights and glimpses, let's talk about how social media just makes all this so much easier for us, right? Like social media makes it very easy for us to stay focused. Am I wrong? No? Well, seriously, let's talk about that for a second. So social media. We live in a social media age where you are going to see much more of the highlights and glimpses of the best days of someone else's life. And so what does that mean? So how should we be interacting and even thinking about social media if we're going to keep our eyes, our focus on our purpose being a person?
Raise your hand if you've figured out social media and a good balance in your life, and we'll come find you, and you can tell us what to do. It's hard. It's really hard. And we have to be careful not to label certain technologies as evil, because it's not. And there's a lot of good that has come from technologies like social media. But the temptation in our hearts is so already prone to comparison and envy and greed. It's already there. And that is just the easiest little click of a button to just give you more of that. It's so tempting. And I think if we know, we just have to be careful to warn ourselves when we're opening that. And I think we do need community to help speak into how we handle social media. But by and large, for most of us, it's fueling unhealthy things in us. And we should take that seriously and ask ourselves, am I even dreaming things for my life, imagining what my life could be because of my walk with God and people in my community who are speaking into that, or because of what I'm seeing online and what I'm just hungry for? That looks satisfying if I could live like that. And so yeah, I don't feel like that's much of an answer besides just say it doesn't make it easier. It's much harder, and I think we need each other's help to walk that line well and talk openly about our own habits with social media and ask ourselves, do we need to get off it or not? Because we're called to throw off every sin and weight. Might not be sin, it might just be something like a technology that's not helpful, so that we can run the race that has been set before us. So if the race set before you today is one that you can't run well because of social media, then I think you have full permission to just jettison it, get it out, and run hard after Jesus, because that's what will matter in the end, and we won't regret that decision.
I think this weekly report, right, of your screen time. And I think on a super practical level, if looking towards Jesus as my purpose is going to recenter me on who I actually am and what my life actually matters for, versus what my eyeballs are literally scanning through in my phone. If I want to be shaped by the looking at Jesus, like looking at my screen time report is alarming. But if I say it will take me literal minutes and hours and time to look at Christ by spending time with him in prayer and quiet in the word, if that is going to define who I am, if that is going to give me the purpose of my life, then that should require more minutes than my scrolling. But practically speaking, I am scrolling constantly, but it's always telling me something else, right? And so ultimately what happens is I end up seeing the symptoms. I end up feeling anxiety. I end up feeling disappointed. My food is not Instagrammable, But it's like at that point, it's like we could do a literal minute-by-minute comparison and say, how much did you spend time gazing at Jesus and what he calls greatness? And how much did you spend time gazing at social media trying to tell you what greatness is? We must spend more time in the thing that actually matters. Because we also believe in something wild, which is this. It actually matters more that you behold him than you do more stuff for him. That's incredible that we believe that and that that's true. So beholding him actually becomes paramount.
What you guys are describing is really just kind of analyzing kind of where you're finding purpose. But here's a question. How do you recognize when you're doing some of the subtle things that are making your purpose drift? You're falling into all kinds of anxiety, putting yourself under a speed limit that you were never meant to drive. So how do you recognize that in your own life? Does that question make sense? Mostly. Yeah. So let me just read it from the paper. Jimmy worded it better than I could. What are some subtle ways anxieties can show up, indicating undue pressure that I may be putting on myself?
Oh, man. I would say how you talk to yourself about success matters. I don't know one person who doesn't have some type of self-evaluation at the end of the day. What was important today? What was valuable today? We tend to all look back on what we did and kind of chalk it up into these categories. And a lot of anxiety can form when you're looking back at your day and going, it just feels wasted and it feels meaningless, and it just feels whether I failed and that's why, or whether I did small things that don't seem significant, and it's producing a lot of anxiety in me. I think just listening to your own self-script and being able to identify it can be really helpful. It's one reason people around me hear me say a lot, have you journaled about that? Have you processed that? Because it is a helpful skill to go, how can I take the spiraling anxious thoughts here and can I put them on words on a page and identify them? That's going to give us some clue to where those thoughts are coming from, because anxieties it could be coming from so many places. So I think we have to be careful not to just whitewash it into one area, but it could be from pressure you've put on yourself to perform for God, for others, to earn your place with him or with other people in your life. I don't know, and that starts with, I think, a little bit of self-awareness. I'm sure you guys would have things to say.
I find some places where I can find it is in anxiety. Anxiety is the message, I'm not doing enough, I'm not doing enough, I'm not doing enough, I need to do more. So whatever is happening, whatever arena in your life, you're being fueled by that kind of engine. But then the opposite of that, anxiety and depression compared, is because when the anxiety has run out and you have failed to do the thing that you think you should be doing, you despair. And you say, well, great. No, I'm never going to be able to do that. I can't do that. And so you surrender to the despair of not being able to do the thing you had set out to do. So now there's depression. Now there's just despondency that I can't reach it. So you can look at where your depression is, because it's in some ways the same issue, just now in reverse. It's saying I should have and I didn't, and I need to give up. And those come together. I think also where my frustration and my rage and my irritations come out. Because usually those happen when I was going for something and I was interrupted from something as small as a flat tire, and I am not going to get my to-do list done today. Something that small to like, I'm working on something and a kid interrupts me. It's obvious that my task is way more important to me in that moment. And even much bigger things, if I am consistently enraged at people or certain situations or irritated by things, it's betraying to me that I am valuing something else. And whatever else is happening is an interruption. So some big red flags for me are anxiety, depression, usually my anger, irritation, frustration. Those are showing me what is really valuable and what I think is what is probably in my way to get to that.
So good. And I would heartily say amen to all those, and any what we talked about earlier as well, comparison being a huge one, but two others that come to mind for me. And I think part of this is even just the aging process as you go through life. And I'm just kind of getting to that age now where, every once in a while I get a sleep injury, and I'm like, how am I getting injured sleeping? So, but just you're reaching that stage of life, and it's like, well, welcome to aging. And what that is, though, is it's beginning to embrace, and it's two things Americans don't want to embrace, is losses and limitations. And in losses and limitations means sometimes things that I could do before or achieve or accomplish or possess or do are now going away. I don't have the same capabilities or skills, or one day even my mind will fade, my memory will fade. Maybe a lot of things that I put identity and hope and even value or worth in of like, man, I am known for A, B, and C. And what aging is, it's a progression of a lot of those losses and limitations unfolding to a greater extent in your life. And can I joyfully embrace those rather than resist those and become bitter? And so as those losses, and a lot of life is that. I mean, Americans, we're taught and we're kind of sold a narrative and a myth of like, don't accept any limits or losses in your life, but really that's just not realistic, and it's just not compatible with how life actually unfolds. Most of what we will experience in this room, if we get to live to ripe old ages, are a steady sequence and events of losses and limitations along the way. And I can definitely feel that in me sometimes as that's going. I'm like trying to pull back and hold on, thinking that life is in holding on to things that I can always do or accomplish or achieve when I was 20 or 30 or whatever that might be. And as that goes away, can I accept that rather than becoming bitter and upset about it?
Remember that no loss or limitation weathered with God and for God is something that is actually counted as a loss in the end. It may be a gain, that when you receive that with humility and joy, it becomes something that magnifies God and then is actually something that we may find reward for in the new heaven and new earth. So like if here we're losing and there's losses and limitations, but weathering those things well for the glory of God with him and for him don't actually turn into losses in the end. They may be our gain. Like Peter is told, you will die and your death will glorify me. The loss of your life will magnify me. Not always what we want, but not a loss truly in the end.
I have one more question for all of you, and maybe just a one-sentence thing. And then I think Lindsay's got one question that she wants to ask. So if you guys can be very gracious, we never keep the time here at Stonegate, okay? So if this is your first Equip night, just bear with us for two more questions. If you do that, I'll personally buy you a coffee and answer whatever theological nonsense that you have for me. Okay, question for all of you. In one sentence, what is one piece of advice you'd give a 20-something, 30-something who's just like, I hear you, I love greatness, and I love the thought of being called to greatness. What is one thing they can do leaving this room to start? I mean, obviously by the book, so we'll take that one off the table. But what is one piece of advice you'd tell them, hey, here's how you can really fulfill your purpose that God has called you to go and do this after this?
I'm going to cheat already. I'm going to take a couple sentences, but I'll be brief. Start with what is explicitly clear. Love God, love people. Rather than get into the specifics, where do I live, where do I work, what do I eat, who do I marry, like all of those things, just start with love God, love people. And as you love God and then love people, a lot of the other things begin to unfold themselves along the way. And so sometimes we can get so focused on the particulars that we aren't paying attention to the big E on the eye chart, which is like, love God, love people, and you will be amazed what doors open up and what things get clarified in your life.
I'll say, I love that you love greatness. Go learn what Jesus thinks greatness is.
Yeah, and I would say if you see a place to go lower, choose it. What I mean by that is if you're at your workplace and there's a task no one wants to do, like clean the kitchen in the break room, do it. At any moment that you see a place to choose the lower path, the more humble path, the lesser than, pick that one. You won't regret it.
Last question, Lindsay.
Guys, I guess we could answer too, but my question is for you guys. So even without social media, just from a quick glance at y'all's life, you guys have, believe it or not, achieved quite a bit that a lot of people would look at and say, gosh, but I want that. You know, you are married, you have families, you married great women particularly, and then also you have religious higher education. You're very educated. You're very well, you know the word, you understand it. You get to spend time doing that. The job you have is that you get to do a meaningful job that directly impacts people. You're in a work environment that is not toxic, maybe not perfect, but it's not toxic, it's thriving, and you get to cause the thriving of a people for the gospel. On that outside, I am looking at y'all going, they did it. They have all the things that anyone could want and long for in what they're doing, what young men and women and even older men and women say to themselves, if I had that, if I had the ministry I wanted in the place I wanted, then I could be happy. So my question is, having the ministry you have, the religious education you have, and the families that you have, did it fill that thing?
No, it's not filled anything, honestly. It's equipped me for better things. But yeah, I can tell you if you're signing up for anything to get recognition from daddy or approval from parents, or you're just trying to feel good about yourself, it's not going to fill any kind of need. I mean, here's the reality. I may have that religious education. I'm still just as ignorant about the things of God and still dependent on Him to reveal Himself in that. I am a husband that fails a lot. I let my wife down a lot. I let my kids down a lot. And so the reality is it's like, man, yeah, we've achieved a lot. I'm still a dirty sinner. You know, there's just two realities. I am a really great sinner, and I'm going to die. So what better off am I than anybody else? But I just think in terms of that, it's God's been gracious to surround me in my life full of people that have reminded me that I am in great need of a great Savior. And the moment I cut off that lifeline, everything else is a dried up well. And to stay with the living water, you know, take away the doctorates, take away the prestige, the platform, whatever it is, and it's all empty cisterns. It's the living well, the living river that gives life. And so, yeah, on this side, I don't feel any more satisfied than I did, you know, on graduation day, or I got the job at Stonegate, and there was that immediate temptation of like, I get to go to the church I love. I get to go to church with Ryan Kearns and Jimmy Neal. You know, it was just all this like amazing like. This is how you get raises, 20-somethings. This is what, yeah. I'm so excited, and it satisfies a lot, but it satisfies a lot because these people bring me closer to the satisfier, not because I get to do anything more satisfying than what I was already doing. So that's what you look for. You surround yourself full of people who are going to diminish themselves and make much of Jesus.
Lindsay's throwing haymakers tonight. So this is, gosh, I'll be a little brief in this because I could answer this for a while. I did get to take a sabbatical earlier this year, and I feel like one of the things the Lord had me enter into for a season of time of just stepping away from pastoral ministry for the first time in like 15, 16 years was that very question to an extent of like, am I doing this? Am I pastoring for an identity or from an identity? And it really was something I spent some time just kind of walking around and observing and looking at my life and just being really curious. And it was actually one of the best gifts I've been given in decades, because I did get to have some clarity and even just some kindness from the Lord to show me of what really mattered. And I love what I get to do. It's a joy, it's a blessing, it's a gift. And I say, but by the grace of God, because I mean, I don't think there's anything altogether special about me. I want to help people. I do want to serve people. I want to see the local church thrive. But like 20, 30 years from now, I don't think ministry is too different than a lot of other occupations. Like, I will be gone from here one day. In some ways, every pastoral role is an interim role. Someone else will do this job one day. And when that's the case, it'll be my kids, it'll be close friends, it'll be my family that still calls me, that still thinks, maybe I'm special, and that, they want to talk to me and hang out and all those things. So it was a right sizing of, this is a gift, this is a wonderful thing I get to do, but in no way is it the thing that brings me satisfaction. Stepping away from ministry was actually a gift, because I got to see that, even of like, Lord, I want to be open-handed. And I really did kind of even put that on the table with the Lord in that moment of like, Lord, if you tell me to go do something else or stop being a pastor or whatever that is, I want to have a heart posture that I would trust you with that. Now, I love doing it. I want to continue doing it, and I feel like you're asking me to continue doing it. But if you are, I don't want to cling so tightly to it like Gollum that it becomes my precious. And so that was a gift.
Well, we love you guys. Kelly's book is on sale. This event wasn't to sell Kelly's book, but it just so happens Kelly has a book on this topic, so we're selling it. And if you think, well, I've heard the talk, now I don't have to buy the book, Kelly deliberately structured it so that she wouldn't give you everything in the book. You still need to read the book to actually have read the book, okay? So go buy the book if you're nice. You may be able to get Kelly to sign it and answer a few questions, so she'll be out there hanging around. We also have the prayer of examine. That's just a moment like this. It's so good for you just to examine your heart, just to spend some time with Jesus and lay bare before him what you really want. Is it that you're idolizing greatness? Is it that you're fearing the mundane as if it's the worst thing in your life? Well, the prayer of examine is going to really bring that out. And if that's not enough, then go join Group Connect at some point and do that with a group of people who can bear your soul with you and reveal some things. You also have Seeking Jesus journals. That's great journal. My friend Jonathan Barr uses his all the time, and I can just tell you it's an amazing tool that you guys can use, and so feel free to pick one of those up. And lastly, come back to the next Equip Night. We'll be talking about how to share the gospel with our Muslim friends. February 25th, put it on your calendars. We deliberately scheduled it after Super Bowl so you would have no excuse. So come to that. Let me just say a quick prayer for us, and then you're dismissed. God, we thank you so much that our purpose is a person. We thank you that more than doing, you have called us to be with you. Father, at the end of the day, all of our accomplishments are going to burn up like chaff. They're going to be footnotes, maybe not even in human history, just footnotes somewhere. And yet, Father, you see, you hear, you remember, and most importantly, you know. Thank you for knowing us and opening the door for us to know you as well. If there's anyone here that has prioritized their doing and their being great more than they have loved their great God, I pray that you will help them to find help tonight and to pray and to find their true purpose. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen.